on your travels back. So I'll start with a quote. In truth, the problem is neither the migrants, nor the refugees, nor the asylum seekers. Borders. Everything begins with them, and all paths lead back to them. There are no longer merely a line of demarcation separating distinct sovereign entities. Increasingly, they are the name used to describe the organized violence that underpins both contemporary capitalism and our world order in general. The women, the men, and the unwanted children condemned to abandonment. The shipwrecks and drownings of hundreds, indeed thousands weekly, the endless waiting and humiliation in consulates and limbo, days of woe spent wandering in airports and police stations and parks and train stations. Then down onto the city pavements where at nightfall, blankets and rags are snatched from people who have already been stripped, deprived of virtually everything. Bare bodies debased by a lack of water, hygiene, and sleep, in short, an image of humanity on a road to ruin. In Necropolitics, Ashimembe provides a concise yet formidable statement concerning the borderization of space used to contain, humiliate, force, displace, violate, and segregate bodies. We are inundated by images, media, and texts that speak to these bodies, forced to negotiate a web of real and imaginary borders fraught with violence and hostility. Close your eyes if you choose. Think. Walk with me through a city. No marks. Nothing in particular. The space is vast and opaque, barren of other life. A rooster crows off in the distance. You hear the delicate utterances of crickets. We walk towards a broken down truck, the frame destroyed with all that remains a twisted corpse of metal. As we continue through the streets, the night is punctuated by brilliant spherical lights, comets. They appear like dying comets hurling towards the earth. Their brilliance is followed by deafening booms, pops, clicks. We run blindly into the night. There is no end in sight, and we chase after a woman and a small child, maneuvering sniper fire in piles of rubbish. The woman falls dead, but we continue with the small child into the vast nightscape, searching for solace amongst the battering of explosions. So what do we see and feel from these statements? Where does your mind take you, to a personal lived experience, or a moment connected to a screenic-based memory, one witnessed through the mediated space of the television, internet, phone, etc.? The scenario I described is from the side-scrolling video game, Lila in the Shadows of War. Palestinian software engineer Rashid Abdoueda created the game in 2015 in response to the 2014 Israeli incursion on the Gaza Strip. More relevant today than ever to speak about. A game that encourages users to play a family attempting to escape the IOF, the Israeli occupation force drone strikes. My talk today explores the impact of such video games that use politically fraught spaces as podia for effectual sensorial exploration. And I unpack a facet of something called serious games, or even further to push it, didactic games, or games that instruct users on cultural, social, and/or political issues impacting at-risk populations, with a focus on education and information building initiatives. Building off the impact of didactic games, I invite all of us to explore 3 video games by independent software developers and artists who employ interactive gaming platforms to expose human rights violations along and between real and imaginary borders. As I progress through my talk today, you will each have the opportunity to download and play, encouraging other forms of collective interplay, overdubbed with commentary and critical musings. Lila and the third game, Bury Me My Love, are available via mobile apps, and Borders, as I mentioned, is by PC or Mac. So the first game, Lila in the Shadows of War from 2015, was developed by Abdoueda as a critique of the 2014 Israeli incursion on the Gaza Strip. In Lila, users play a father attempting to save his family during a night raid. The second example focuses on Borders from 2017, a video game created by Mexican-American illustrator and game developer Gonzalo Alvarez. Borders is what is referred to as a top-down style arcade video game. So those of you from the 80s, 90s might recognize this style. It's based on his parents' contentious border crossing from Mexico to the United States in the 1980s. Multiple border crossings, I think it was like 10 or 15, as he mentioned. The third game, Bury Me My Love, is a collaborative project developed by Pixel Hunt, Figs, and Art France. Bury Me is an interactive mobile app game that follows Syrian refugees Noir and Majid across the country, actually multiple countries, as they negotiate the dangerous journey to safety. All three games require players to move through digital spaces, facsimiles of actual nation states, deserts, oceans, and fronteras. How can these video games be viewed as didactic tools to educate users about the loss of human life in spaces or regions fraught with violence? What can they teach us as users about the perils of migration and forced displacement? I will mention that one of the slides does have an image of 4 corpses of children that were killed on the beach during the 2014 Gaza Strip, so I can preface that before we get there. So didactic games, let me first start by identifying and extrapolating on the power of video games, especially when it comes to educating users about social, political, ecological, it's a big one, and cultural issues and concerns. The gaming platform is paradoxical, one that can, and we see this a lot in the media, desensitize users to violence while simultaneously affording players an opportunity to engage in scenarios that establish and build affective responses. This, and we'll of course debunk that notion of desensitization. This can be achieved through playing serious or persuasive games. And originating from Clark C. Apps and expanded by Ian Bogost, serious or persuasive games are, quote, video games created to support the existing and established interests of political, corporate, and social institutions. However, Bogost also suggests that serious games are not games in the service of governments, corporations, but they're kindred amongst gamers that challenge such institutions, creating opportunities to question, change, or eliminate them. However, I refer to the games today as didactic. First mentioned in a publication from 2020 titled Plain Killbox, Didactic Gaming and Drone Warfare in Video Games in the Global South, I focus on a single video game called Killbox, a game created by artist Joseph Delop. The game was created to expose human rights violations caused by US drone strikes in Waziristan, and that used something called the Killbox tactic, employed by the US military, where they look at behavioral markers, decide that that area has loosely defined this notion of a threat, and they'll just carpet bomb the area. Delop's game allows users to either play a ground civilian or drone sensor operator. And as the ground civilian, the only option is to avoid getting hit. When playing the drone sensor operator, the objective is to drop the payload on the target below target. Even if one abstained from engaging the weapon, the game ultimately forces the weapon to deploy, thus killing without our control. Delop limits our choices, forcing us into a decision that we otherwise would not make. And this lack of choice on the part of the game design is, of course, once again, by choice. It should be of note that, quote, most video games do not create empathy because their chosen storylines do not trigger deep psychological involvement in the characterization, as stated by Asi Wolensari et al. But empathy through gaming can thus cultivate experiences, though truncated sensorial interactions. Adler claims that, quote, empathy is also a projection of one's own personality into the personality of this other person or avataric entity, to feel with the heart, see with the eyes, and listen with the ears of another person. In Avant-Garde in Video Games, Brian Schrank unpacks the impact of emotive and affectual output created through a critical reading of Mark Hansen's sensory motor power. That is the cycle in which the body-mind receives sensory input and produces motor output. As we move through virtual game spaces like Killbox, Lila, et al., we rely on visual and oral input. In some cases, with Bury Me, there's haptic input as well, and listen for cues that prompt our movements and vice versa. According to Schrank, these movements through virtual space are, quote, sensible beyond usual concentration because the game leverages more of the sensual capacity of the player's body, creating affectivity. And further by Hansen, this type of affectivity is, quote, the capacity of the body to experience itself as more than itself, and thus to deploy sensory motory power to extend its communion with the artistic medium. And more earnestly, the player commits to playing the game, the more we feel rather than see space. So, Lila and Shadows of War, and I'll move through these, giving you a rough idea of what the storyboard looks like. So side scrollers are exactly kind of what they entail. It's very one-dimensional. You see typically just the profile of the characters as you move through a very flat dimensional plane. So I do want to bring up a point. This game was banned by Apple, by the Apple Store, because you can probably guess the political nature of the game. So it is available on the Google App Store and now on some third-party sites as well. So we should play. So as we move through, take mental notes on what you're seeing. And if you download the game at some point, maybe what you're hearing, if anything, any tension, stressors, anxious responses to the scenarios, etc. What is the goal? How can you win in a place where loss is already common vernacular? So as I mentioned, the game is available for Google Play and was created by Abueda, a Palestinian filmmaker, game developer, and artist based out of the city of Nablus. So he witnessed firsthand and also secondhand through the screen on July 8th in 2014, 2 Palestinians were killed during the Nakba celebrations known as the catastrophe in the West Bank and Gaza. Shortly after, 3 Israelis were killed, and the IOF launched a relentless drone and bombing campaign throughout the Gaza Strip throughout the rest of the summer. Images of death, collateral damage, ruin emanated from the region, an all too familiar scene. 4 young children of the Bakar family were playing soccer on the beach when they were killed by shrapnel from an offshore Israeli vessel. So that image is coming up. If it's something that you'd like to admit, then so these are some scenes from the game, and you can see the controls are rather rudimentary. So it should be next slide. Yeah, it's the next slide. So these are the images, and we'll see last that Rashid embodied those characters into the game as a form of kind of graphic homage. So in an interview from 2021, Abueda reflects on the media's narrative concerning Palestinian suffering under Israeli occupation, saying, quote, "Palestinians in the mainstream media are always dehumanized. Their personal stories are not covered. They ignore that we exist, that we have feelings, that we are living under attack, and that we don't have rights as everyone else in the world. And I try to make something to break that." So how can we learn through active play? The game requires users to survive the IOF drone strikes, the bullets, the bombs, all while attempting to protect your family and reach the border for safety. So speaking to the affectual nature of the game, Abueda continues by commenting on the effects produced by the game and the didactic intention, saying, quote, "One of the hardest things is to experience in war seeing a father carrying the body of their killed child. I try to share the feeling of hopelessness, fear, anger, regret, and sadness in the game. In the game, you cannot do the things that you are supposed to do because in real life, you can't do that during wartime either. Even what looks like a moral choice is something that you cannot do. Sometimes the game becomes very slow. You have to push a dumpster, wait for the drone to go away. It makes the player feel uncomfortable. But at the same time, it will give them a chance to take a deeper look at the scene and think about it in their subconscious. So regarding standard methods of play, Lila covers all the basic components: puzzle solving, narrative, objective, character avatar development. But what does this do for us as the users? And how does this type of play, you can think of it as play, help us to process the effects of war and violence, if at all? So at the end of each iteration that you play, there's of course statistics and facts from the incursion in Gaza. So to move on to Alvarez's game Borders, this was created in response to the precarious crossing affecting thousands of people seeking entry into the US via the southern border each year. Inspired by his parents' multiple border crossing experiences, Alvarez's game serves to inform users about the perilous trek through the desert terrain. Created in 2017, Alvarez uses top-down style formats. So we have an aerial view, and the piece was first displayed on an arcade console. However, rather than using a joystick in the current iteration, you can use directional keys on your computer. So there's a video. I won't play it, but it just gives you kind of an overview of what the game looks like. So we start by facing a map with a rudimentary compass in the upper right corner. Once the user clicks the spacebar to start, you can maneuver the avatar through an 8-bit style terrain. Dressed in a sombrero and suspenders, you must travel around skeletons, cacti, trash, and piles of debris. And border agents, which you can see here in the green, dressed in these neon green abrasive uniforms, punctuate your movement through the digital space. In the upper corner, a timer keeps track of each session. Below the timer, a scorecard measures the longest session without dying and the number of fatalities. And users must also remain hydrated, walking over water jug icons. If you make it past the guards, you must maintain hydration, or else you will also die. Once the avatar is killed, a skeleton icon appears, indicating the number of deaths and the option to restart the session. As the avatar crosses this new terrain, you can collect more jugs of water as life support. But as more border agents approach, you must avoid being, quote, seen. So this kind of gold light appears around you, and if you're caught, you're dead. Unlike Lila, however, there's an opportunity to actually win the game, to reach an endpoint. And Lila dies every time. Hate to spoil alert there, but dies every time. And what is the reward if you win this? Detention, negotiating the precarious legal terrain associated with undocumentedness. We are meant to feel, sense anxiety and stress, frustration as we move across this virtual terrain. And going back to strength, the argument that the games are dynamic of, quote, even a simulated system can react in real time. Like Lila and Bury Me, we are foreclosed within the gaming plane, limited by pre-designed menu options. In the final example, we follow the character Noir as she moves through Syria as she tries to reach Europe for safety. Western Europe, Eastern Europe, depends which iteration you decide to play. After losing a family member, she makes the impossible decision to leave her husband, Majid, as he stays behind to care for relatives. Using 2 smartphones, users must communicate with Noir and help her mentally, physically, financially, emotionally through her long and perilous journey. Unlike Lila and Borders, Bury Me, My Love offers players a complex layer otherwise omitted from the other games, oral stressors. Developers of the game wanted to use not just rush through a serious gaming sequence. In other games, we have game-induced anxiety and stressors that occur over a short measured period of time, like 10 or 20 minutes. But in Bury Me, My Love, the game occurs during pseudo real time, meaning the responses from Noir could take minutes to hours. As she comes across roadblocks or other obstructions, you must help her make decisions that could alter the narrative or trajectory of the story. The real-time dimension is also complemented by the use of push notifications. So think of it like a WhatsApp component to your phone. And we do receive actual notifications from Noir. We are thus pulled into her avataric fictional world, not confronted by a constant barrage of bombs or violence, which does occur throughout the game, but rather we are confronted with the mundane, the pedestrian, the long stretches of waiting that require us to merely consider time. There are 19 outcomes to play. I have failed every time I have played. I'm playing right now, same things are happening. Running into smugglers, I'm running out of money, things like that. Not giving very good advice, trusting the wrong people, maneuvering refugee camps, deciding on alternative transportation options. These are all available to you as the user. You even have to stop and take care of a child at one point, decide if you are going to amputate somebody's leg. Noir is a doctor. So you can end up in different routes through Turkey, Greece, Bulgaria, Italy. The options, essentially, as I mentioned, there's 19 with 40 different cities that you may end up in. In an interview from 2018, Florent Marin, the key developer for Pixel Hunt, extrapolated on the intended effect of Bury Me. The game is based on actual refugee stories and the struggles many encounter along the way in search for safety. He says, quote, "More than anything, it's the perfect tool to stay in touch with our loved ones at any moment, as long as they're online. That's probably why Noir feels real. She isn't as disposable as most game characters. She's got a lot on her plate, so you spend a lot of time waiting to get news from her. Did she find a place to sleep? Did she reach her destination? Those lights she told you about, were they dangerous? You wait for your phone to vibrate with new notifications. You make up scenarios in your head. Where is she?" The emotive affective component is thus meant to give us, the user, a responsibility in caring for Noir. So game designer Mark Rosewater states, "A book or movie shows us what it is like to be in a character's shoes. But it is the video game that can put us in those shoes." In his games, he seeks 2 goals: to understand and cultivate emotion. Very loosely defined. Though these games exist outside the spaces of actual war zones, borders, oceans, and fronteras, their function is to procure this affective response. We are meant to walk through virtual desert scapes, traverse bombed out urban terrain, and commit to our time to virtual avatars as she makes the trek across Syria to spaces unknown. How is desensitization of the individual realized within the simulated spaces? And what specific emotions are we supposed to feel as we play? Quote, the virtual removes the participant from direct interaction with victims, simulated or real. However, developers like Avoida conclude that games like Lila speak more to the active experience of the player, where we take on simulated responsibility for life. Quote, when you retell a movie or book you watched or read, you usually speak about the journey of the hero. But in games, you talk about your experience. You say, I did that. That is because you become one with the main character of the game. The more engaging way to share messages, feelings, and experiences with everyone. In this game, even if you think you have the choice, you don't. You're powerless and weak. So here's some screenshots to give you an idea of just what kind of conversations look like. Thus, where can games take us? What function can video games offer? And based off the content of each game discussed today, the intentions are to extract a broad spectrum about emotional output, to force us into scenarios where we are helpless, stressed, perhaps even lost. If only for a moment, a modicum of empathy is produced. When the games have reached their goal, we have not become desensitized, but rather sensitized to these scenarios, playing across places like the Gaza Strip, Western Europe, the southern border of the US, and other fraught and contentious spaces. To muse on a statement by Schrank, games afford us spaces to cultivate a broad spectrum of emotions. However, once we log out or the game ends, what is next? To muse, closure becomes a possibility only for players who leave the games and take actual action. It's not really stuff. I don't know what happened here. But these games, many others like them, are available on platforms like